Also, my colleague Holly is looking at questions asked in the chat. So if you have questions, Holly will let me know as well. So after the second round, we'll just take those questions, and if we have time for the third round, then we'll go for it. So welcome to the podium discussion, and I would start with the same question for everyone. Well, can I share the screen so that we okay, so good. So Sarah, I'll start with you maybe. Sorry. So can you introduce yourself, say a few words about yourself, and the question is, what is the best way to reduce emissions from passenger transport in your opinion?
Hi, my name is Sarah. I am actually born and raised in Berlin, so I know the city pretty well, but I also know how other countries function and how traffic is working there. So it's always good to kind of have a look outside the box and see what others are doing. So I'm excited to also hear from you today and what you found. I work for the German Cyclist Association. I am a transport and policy consultant there. We are the biggest lobby for cyclists in the world. We have around 200,000, over 200,000 members. So it's quite a big team. And I'm an urban geographer at heart, so I'm kind of into city planning a little bit. I worked in sub-Saharan Africa for a long time on transport policies, which was exciting. I always thought Germany has it all figured out and it's done. And then I came back and I realized, oh, maybe I should spend more time here. So here I am. And I do think that thinking mobility as a whole and offering fair options for people to be active in their mobility is the best way to go.
Excellent, thank you. Same question. Let's start with you, Kristina. What about the best? Maybe just a few words of the introduction, and what is the best way to reduce emissions?
Good morning. I'm Kristina Gaučė, coming from Lithuania, with us today, and yes, I have almost 20 years of practicing and experience in urban planning and mobility management and sustainable urban mobility in particular. Over the years, my kind of business model was to learn in Europe and to put them as practice in Lithuania or our countries. I worked for Czech, Moldova, Belarus, Turkey, for example. Turkey at the moment. Continuing with what Sarah said, I do agree that technical mobility is very important, but at the same time, I think that if our kind of polluting enemy is private car, diesel, and petrol, so then combating and fighting it, the only alternative, the only equal alternative to be public transport. That needs to be effective, confident, convenient, reliable, comfortable, and true. So that would be my recipe number one. And the second recipe, in spite of alternative given, is already working on restricted access by cars, parking policy, emission zones, entrance fees, and so on. So because not everyone can commute on time tomorrow. And as you said in your speech, Andrzej, that we have this status thing for car. It's not only for car, we have also status thing, at least in Lithuania, and I think it's important too, for private property. We have private houses. We do not move after our jobs, after our schools. We buy land, we build a house, and we live there, and we are expecting that our kids would live in the same house. That also occurs problems and some habits while commuting. We cannot have walkable city in 15 minutes because your house is half hour away by car. So that's one maybe also to have in mind when we discuss urban planning and issues too.
It's very important, and I can confirm the same applies to school as well. Ownership not only over the car, but also the house, with repercussions for transport sector as well. Thank you. How about you?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me. It's very nice to be here. Meet you all. I did my PhD research on how to make recalcitrant biomass not accessible for industrial applications. pipelines and biofuels. And I started basically at the NOW, which is a government-owned company, as an expert for advanced biofuels, but now working as a program manager for all kinds of renewable fuels. And basically what I do in my daily life is I help the ministry, the federal ministry for transport and digital transport, to design their funding program, implement it, and also evaluate it for renewable fuels. I don't want to say the exact number now, but it's more than €1 million. And so it's an important topic for the ministry. And for me personally, the most important thing we do right now is advanced biofuels. Biofuels in general account for about 75 to 90% of the greenhouse gas emissions Germany does right now in the transportation sector. Though I want to also say that this is of course part of the more improving part. And I think YouTube just said beforehand, avoiding and shifting traffic is of course also important. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
Excellent, thank you. And I think that speaking of avoiding, there is something that you will probably tell us about cycling as well. But cycling, like it's itself, can you tell it like that? Over to you.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Our story. So my name is Alexander Czech. Cargoroo. We are a provider of electric cargo bike sharing. It's the biggest one in the world. We don't know exactly. There's another competitor somewhere in Asia. But at least in Europe, yeah, we are providing right now 1,400 shared electric bikes. And yeah, we are from Amsterdam, and since last year we are also building up right now the biggest fleet of shared cargo bikes in Germany with 300 bikes. And yeah, we really hope that we can give more access to more people for a shared electric cargo bike. Because a cargo bike itself has the same problem as a car. If the cargo bike is owned, it also stays for 95% during the day. So that's why we want to share the bike. Now, in case we have 40 to 60 people which are sharing one bike, that saves emissions, but also gives access to more people and saves a lot of space. So that's why I'm super happy that we are also talking about correlation urban planning, as it's very important. And yeah, and you also asked me about the biggest lever I see. I think we need definitely more transparency in terms of costs. Right now, we don't include negative external costs of cars. So in my opinion, cars are way too cheap, and also the funding for the energy transformation is very car related currently in Germany, unfortunately. And we, as a provider of car bikes, we see the need to change that in the future, and to maybe car bikes also as means of transport to give more people easier access to bikes, which is also a social component because not everyone can afford to buy a car bike for 7,000 to 8,000 €. So yeah, you see a lot of things that are coming together, but yeah.
And let's stay with you for the second round, and then we'll just go back in the same way. So, you know, the question is, why do you invite someone to deal with freight transport to the public discussion deal with passenger transport? And the reason is for me clear. Many people own a car with a clarification with explanation that, well, I need to transport this wardrobe from IKEA once a year. So that's why I just have this car, right? And I use it for, well, daily commuting because I have it. And what's how can bikes facilitate the model shift for passenger cars, like especially cargo bikes as well, so that you don't have this excuse, you don't have other ways to transport your, well, IKEA wardrobe?
Yeah, exactly. First of all, you mentioned it already, most of the times cars are empty. It's easy to go through the city. I think in Germany it's 1.2 persons per car using the car. So most of the time the cars are empty, and even things which are transported are usually very small. So we see our bikes quite often at IKEA and I passed by yesterday to Park and Leistag. I spotted 4 of our bikes. So most of our users are doing grocery shopping, going out with kids, and that's something where they use a bike instead of the car. And that's why we can give a contribution to the traffic transformation.
Amazing. Very good point. I'm just wondering if this is the way you start your day, just trying to figure out where my bikes are. But yes, indeed, I think there's a huge potential to, well, just get rid of the excuse. If you want to have a car, just be honest about this, why you want to have it, and not because you need to transport something once in a while. I will pass over to Sarah because you've been focusing on cycling, and when we had our conversation before this fun discussion, you provided a few examples of case studies where cycling developed in a very attractive way in mode of transport. And what would be the main drivers? Like, what would be the policies that you would need for more activity? And hopefully, that activity will increasing. Going back to our Czech for example, increasing activity for cycling would reduce activity for other modes of transport. So, what policies would you need to facilitate increasing activity levels for cycling?
So what we did was we looked at some international best practice examples, starting at the Netherlands was always also for Germans. It's always a good example, which we should keep looking at, but also Spain, the United States have changed quite massively their way of thinking, how to install infrastructure for cyclists and pedestrians. So it feels like the whole world is moving in that sector, which is good. So Utrecht in the Netherlands is a good example. They formed a new government, and this was something that was one of the key factors from all of the cities and countries we looked at worldwide. The key factor was that the government said, we want this, we want to make this happen, and then set their strategy. So they decided to prioritize pedestrians and cyclists first, then public transport, and then the cars. So according to that, they put up their strategies and the infrastructure for that, and you can see that in the city. And I think so. This is one of the key elements the policymakers to set their goals and to be ambitious and say we want this, because otherwise it doesn't really happen. I mean, I could give you Germany, unfortunately, as a worst case, because we do a lot of things and we're ambitious and we do invest money into cycling and pedestrian infrastructure, but we have an issue which is called the Road Traffic Act, which hinders communities to install cycling infrastructure or safe crossings for pedestrians, because the main focus still is the car. The car needs to flow easily and safely, and so cities and communities can't really plan for other things. So I think that's the biggest issue we have here, and I hope we can resolve it.
And in some cases in Europe, that's even worse. Yeah, very, very interesting points. However, to be realistic, if we look at the city center or the cities, bikes, active modes of transport are very important. But in Germany, going out to Brandenburg, or in Poland, going back to the place where I come from, car is kind of like essential to survival because of this rural area is not being very well connected by public transport. So if we stick to cars, if we stick to other modes of transport, actually, for aviation, railways, we need to move away from fossil fuels in those sectors as well. So, Kathleen, my question would be: you dealing with electric fuels, you dealing with alternative cleaner fuels. In which areas can they be used most effectively, most efficiently? And what would be the time horizon maybe?
Yeah, so basically there are two major rules for renewable fuels right now in German cities. One of them is pretty much accepted. The other one is maybe a little bit contested, I would say. So the first one is the accepted one, which is basically heavy duty application. So whenever you have to go really far distances or you have to have a high energy power output, you can't really rely yet, and also in the foreseeable future, on battery-driven mobility. And that's, for instance, aviation and shipping, right? There's also some long-distance truck rolling in there. There's also some agricultural machines in there, but the main points are basically long-distance shipping and aviation. The second part, or the second role, is cars. And a lot of people don't like that because we have electric cars and they work perfectly fine. But the problem with that is right now that basically Germany has the goal of getting 15 million electric cars on German roads by 2030, which is a great goal. I'm not going to go into the whole discussion about is this all green energy or not, right? Where's the electricity coming from? But it's a good goal. And when you look at the numbers 21 to 22, actually the number of newly registered electric cars doubled in Germany, which is again great. But then if you look at the absolute numbers, you will see that's actually only 600,000 cars compared to about 48 million cars in Germany. And it's not enough, basically. So even if you want it, it's difficult to achieve it. If you want to go 50 million electric cars by 2030, we would need every year, all the newly registered cars would have to be 70%. And in 2022, it was 11%. And this is not accounting for basically the lead out of cars. I don't know if you heard about it, but a lot of electric cars were also sold to Denmark, for instance, because the policies within the European Union were not well, I don't know, designed exactly. So, so this is the second goal, which a lot of people have a problem with. But if we realistically want to reach our goals, we might have to accept this option at least. Yeah.
Excellent. And in terms of aviation and heavy duty, for example, it's also an area in which we have quite some progress. European legislation, for example, requiring a charging station or a fueling station for hydrogen or electric fuels every 70 kilometers. If I'm not, that's right. So thank you so much for that. Speaking, so we touched upon different modes of transport separately, but Kristina, we have initially a project, quite a few discussions about more holistic view as well. So something that you actually as well as mentioned. What policies can drive this holistic view that you combine different modes of transport? You know, it's 1 + 1, in this case would be 4, and not 2. So are there policies that could help us to integrate different modes of transport and measures?
Well, I think not policies, but policy makers can help us, because what also our vice minister, she was mentioning good collaboration between different ministries, which is good to mention, but I don't think it's so true. I mean, even in small country, we have bunches of national strategies, bunches of national programs, funding programs, priorities, and so on. And we have overriding a national progress program, and then we have on the top being a master plan of spatial attitude. And for each word, for each sentence, I didn't introduce myself properly. I'm also urban planner originally, and but I'm working mostly in the public sector as social partner. That's why I know this cuisine very well. So you need in those different programs, the different processes, but every indicator we need to find somehow. We need to convince. We need to prioritize. The area is one thing. Ministry of Transport and aviation further thing. Association of Public Cities, they are fighting for something completely else, although they have the same goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, to increase safety, to increase security, to increase reliability, and after all, to increase mobility. I mean, what does it mean, mobility? If people can choose from various options how to travel today, then it's mobile. If you can choose from sustainable modes, then it is sustainable mobility. And so even when at a national level, we are not, we are not coordinating this concept, this definition, what to expect from cities implementing very local point orientated measures. So this overall understanding somehow needs to be increased and increased and increased. And I work in this field for 20 years. I was the first edition of Sustainable Urban Mobility Guidelines. I was trainee at that moment. I think that's how I met Martin. Maybe not. You're not listening. I was looking forward all the time to listening council. That was my qualification. So I was trainee, and then I had this task to deliver Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan agenda to national context. And when I came to Parliament of Lithuania with my speech, I was not like she's crazy, she's enthusiast, who led her to the parliament and so on. So it was more than 10 years ago. Now a second edition is in place. I was already co-author of second edition of guidelines, and perception in Lithuania is very different already. So things are moving, but so slowly, so slowly. So this whole thing, not understanding mobility as main paradigm of urban planning, of urban living in cities, influences that we have those gaps in passenger transport. And there's no good recipe. Just talking to, like my mom of my husband said, tone is made for talking. Keep talking, keep sharing, keep collaborating, and that would be the main recipe, I think, in this holistic approach.
Alexander.
Yeah, it's usually the issue of giving access to all people and to all kinds of mobility in a smart way. And we talk about policy, but we talk about policy. I have a very specific example where I would like to hear your opinion. Something which really strikes me all the time, we are investing right now for about 10,000 euro per charging station. A lot of money for charging infrastructure, which is good. As you have, for instance, your target of 15 million electric cars, and access to electricity. At the same time, I wonder if this is actually fair what we're doing right now. So it's 10,000 euro taxpayers' money. People which are buying electric cars, usually financially very well off, who either even don't own a car, especially if they work from home. There's a lot of data. Then I wonder, why don't we solve that issue with offering infrastructure which gives access to all kinds of mobility. So right now we're building charging infrastructure only for the car. Why don't we do that also, including charging infrastructure for bike batteries, open infrastructure which can be used by all kinds of providers? And I think that is a good example, in my opinion, but a few things. People something linked, but that's a good example that we could shape policy in the right direction for access to all. Right now, I see the problem that we are financing the rich to own an electric car, which is not shared usually. But yeah, that's me.
That's so true. And last Friday, I had another discussion and in context on a very strange name like map of the daily trips or something. But I also have this point, stop focusing on new supplies for people. I mean, what governments, especially local governments, what they are doing, they deliver new supplies, electric charging equipment, some I don't know, some supplies like additional nice to have stuff that we already have, instead of working with demand and managing the demand. I mean, people. We do not need to predict how people will react. We do not need to always to be in line with the expectations, but we need to manage mobility. And there are plenty of ways doing it without building expensive infrastructure. And especially in let's say, new members of the European Union, Eastern European countries, we are yet not so rich to, like, again, our Vice Minister said, we have this huge program on financing for electric cars. I bought one because they gave me 5,000 euros to buy it, and also they gave me extra euros to get rid of my old car. So of course I bought it. And my company I work for, they are charging my car. So how, and they give me free parking, although I normally I would pay next my office €2 per hour, but for electric car it's for free. And I can ride bus lanes, priority bus lanes with my electric car. Why would I consider going back to the public transport to that supplies which I have? As I'm not sure person, but they really are supplying me with all those policies, and they are convincing me. But the electric cars will also be okay. They are not polluting in that way, but they have particulates. They also occupy the center. They are part of the traffic jams. They get the accidents and so on and so on. So just like Alexander said, we should need to stop focusing on new supplies to the people to convince them for something else. Better is to understand their needs and to manage it. in the smooth way, like politicians were doing all for ages, managing people expectations with some tools, but not giving them gifts and bonuses and stuff.
That's an excellent point, and I will open the floor to further questions. But just to recap on that, for motorways, there was the issue that the more you build, the more cars you have, right? You build it, and they will come. Somehow we can't really apply this to the public transport, right? So yes, we should develop public transport, and yes, even if it's empty now, it will be full later on. If people in Brandenburg realize, yes, the bus is coming every half an hour, so they would use it. And instead of, I had an experience of being all alone in a huge bus in Brandenburg once, and they're just another friend at that minute. So, but if it's reliable, more people will use it, and fewer people will have a car. Will meet the need, will have a car. Okay, any questions in the audience? I have a bunch of questions anyway, but I would like to have some other questions. Yes, please. Yeah.
Well, sort of more of a common question. Jeremy Rifkin, big author, it's a book on the fourth industrial revolution, saying that we need to reduce transport by private cars by 80% in order to be truly sustainable. So in terms of that, we need to sort of change our mentality towards where we are giving those incentives to people. And for you, Andrzej, coming from an Eastern European country, it's very important that the building that they will come approach is very not accessible to a lot of towns and smaller towns in terms of prices, and so from that point of view, maybe do you think there's a way of maybe, I don't know, diverting subsidies from other places and then putting it into that, and the whole order of people eventually realizing that they have good public transport and that they should use it? Or do you think of any other way of filling those buses, so to speak?
A good question, good point. I wonder about other Eastern colleagues who are here in the audience as well, if you share the experience. But whenever I came to Poland, there was a new motorway opened somehow. So yeah, the resources were there, and these were mostly EU resources. So this should have been done differently. So yes, it's when you're crossing the border between Poland and Germany, you don't see or into the country because the motorway is so well developed. But if you're trying to take a public transport between Poland and Germany to neighboring cities, forget it. You would need to change the train 3 times before you go through 20 kilometers. So it's something that we should have been taking differently, and definitely I think also the purpose station there out. So
Hi, just a question for Kristina on the very last point that you were making. You were talking about shifting away from supply and trying better to manage the demand and expectations. And have you seen like specific examples of how that's done in different places, or do you have ideas of how local governments can successfully do that?
So we can go from the theoretical approach from my perspective, from my observations and researches. Those demand, I would say, management measures or policies, they need to be, first of all, addressed at the few points. Does it have a huge theoretical impact? Does it have a huge or a massive implementation cost? And does it have barriers theoretical, like political, non-acceptance, and so on? So when you have this kind of 3 or 4 layers of criteria, then you can consider various policies. And the most effective policy and most cheap policy implemented them to manage demand is parking policy and parking standards. There's nothing new and nothing else I can say, but parking is the main thing which people are considering when they are using the private car. Can I park there? Can I park for free? Will I find easily this place? And so on and so on. And recently we are working as a continuity of the sustainable urban mobility plan, which I forgot to mention when I was completing. We put this kind of rule or recommendation to municipality: work hard with developers and land use planning process before building permits to accommodate desired mobility in the new development. And so my last two projects were on two huge developments that were, I don't know how many square meters and how many employees and so on, huge, on the scale, huge developments. And the task for developer and for me, representing this developer and city at the same time as mediator, is to find ways how to find infrastructure in the office, in the shopping malls, not to attract people by car. And I think I can say the only rule: decrease your parking spaces. Decrease your parking space. It's not about 10 shelters for bicycle or electrical charging machines. It's about not having enough parking spaces. But another problem that occurs: the being administrative environment has standards, minimum standards for parking, which says that for every square meter you have this square meter of parking spaces, and then the developer is stuck. And but some of them, very sustainable ones, they accepted is they agreed to pay fee, like punishment, the government for not building parking spaces at the, as it says in national regulation. So that would be my, how to say, from that practical and theoretical approach, parking policy would be the number first to rule this management, and of course travel behavior, various campaigns. I mean, people do not understand. I have one of my best friends, she's my age, and she's not using public transport because she's afraid to use the electric car. She never uses it because she always uses the car. And now she feels like she's too old to install an app and to start using it because she might be wrong, she might fail, and then controller comes and so on and so on. So it's only about awareness, about showing people, about walking them, about I do exercise like I go out with people with disabilities, with deaf people or blind people, just to realize how they are moving, what barriers they are feeling. So this is the second measure, the second policy would be really testing, tasting, and then awareness raising, informing, and so on. It's very difficult, but when we start with school children, when I start from my son, for example, 2 years old, he was with this not almost bicycle, but through the snow, he was going to the kindergarten because I didn't give another option. And he now thinks that it's fair because he started his life in this way, although I'm driving an electric car now, so but still, so that would be my second. Sorry, I took too much for.
It's fascinating, and it's also the issue of well, education starting early. When I hear about kids being brought to school by car, right? Actually, Ancygier to have quite a lot of space for the kids. Well, then when they in the first 40s, they may not really know how to use public transport. Can be afraid to use public transport. So, indeed, education as actually. You mentioned your paper is a very important element that can shape our behavior. Any other questions? Yeah.
I believe we're not breaking any new grounds here, but if you look at like certain population, I come from Turkey, and in Istanbul, the public transport is quite great and it's very sustainable. And Istanbul is also very, very densely populated. So I am seeing a correlation between like population density and people's leading into public transport. The same goes for New York City, for example, and a lot of other places. In Berlin, there are about 3 million people in Berlin in a much spread out fashion than it is in Istanbul. But public transport is still great. But in Istanbul, you are practically forced to take the public transport in many places. And that is because of the reasons Kristina talked about. Parking space is incredibly hard to come by, and it takes you about like 40 minutes to find some place. But I was wondering, it sounds silly, but is there any research being done into like getting to populate concentrated that would naturally make them more, maybe public transport more appealing to them? Well, it also would come with major downsides, but just wondering about that.
Yeah, that's a good question. Can I cover a little bit? Actually, I also forgot to mention that as the key expert, I work on Ankara SUMP, which is also metropolitan.
Can you explain SUMP? What is it?
Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan for Ankara. So it's also very dense populated city with a functional zone like almost 5 million or even more. And they have developed very well public transport. And when I was checking household surveys, which we were going to conduct, I saw the question prepared by our consultants, like saying, do you have good access to public transport? Yes, it's like in 15 minutes walking distance. And I was, no, it's a mistake, it should be 5 minutes. No, we do not have places where you can walk 5 minutes and have metro station or something. So even in very dense places, you cannot have very well developed public transport, but in lower, more compacted cities, you can have very well developed public transport. But when it becomes like social policy, like socially funded policy, and I think it's the case in some of the German places, but you do not need to have the same quality and quantity of public transportation in the whole city of Lithuania. The whole Lithuania is only less than 3 million of people, but we still need to assure public transportation. So in our spatial master plan for whole Lithuania, we design like mobility zones for like maybe 10 zones of mobility with different layers. With very high quality mobility services like in Vilnius and Kaunas in connection with the 2 most biggest cities, and then this medium mobility, which means that you easily and quickly can get access to get from this medium mobility to the better mobility, and also those wide areas where very few people are living, they also need to be transported to the daily needs. So demand public transport on demand for social taxis, that would be the solution. So I don't know if I covered your question very well, but compactedness, it's very important. And as more compacted city, as more supplies you can receive and they buy up. But it doesn't mean that in low density that you need to have poor public transportation services.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, which also connects to the comment from before with rural areas, is that there you have the bike as your perfect feeder system, because a lot of the times policymakers won't be satisfied if you cannot present them with the immediate benefit for installing a bus line, or public transport is much more expensive than cycling infrastructure. It's faster build, so a lot of the times the cycling infrastructure would be, like I said, especially in rural areas, your feeder system to public transport. So that's what I meant with mobility as a whole, to think these two especially together, because a lot of times it's just much more time to build public transport than cycling.
Exactly, and multimodality, that would be the case during your first last mile with bicycle. But that's the whole chain. I was trying to explain with public transport, but the whole chain, you go with your bicycle to the public transport station, which has only one direction to the better of the places of public transport, and then you switch to the metro or bus transport or whatever you manage. So that whole connectivity chain should be without any like water line. It has no empty places. So mobility chain is to be this water pump.
I would only add not only cycling, but also walking, because sometimes walking is not very attractive mode of transport to the train station, bus station. So sometimes, especially during the night, when some people don't feel comfortable to walking to the subway station, so they will just go somewhere by car. So also just to this very important mode of transport actually that we kind of like shouldn't forget to use. Another question. Yes, Holly, we have a question from online.
Let's see if someone online. So NOW-GmbH is noting that we're now 7 years after the adoption of Paris, the Paris Agreement, and with that, the most climate-friendly mode of transport on cross-border long-distance transport is railways as an alternative to aviation. And that there's been very little progress in this sector. For example, there are only 2 long-distance trains per day from France to Spain. the market alone is creating the transformation needed. So what can we do? Or what alternative is there?
Very good point, very good question. And well, we do have different modes of transport, but what about railways? Would anyone like to cover this point?
I mean, I can just say from personal experience, I commuted by train from Berlin to Gothenburg for a few years, and that's 13 hours if it goes all right, and it's not fun. So, but it's more environmentally friendly and more by aircraft, so I did it. And I do see, though, in this room, probably it's a different picture, but a lot of people from my personal life, they would never do this. They always choose comfort over this kind of stuff. And I think one thing that we have to also realize is that this is a very agreeable discussion we're having right now. We all agree on everything, but a lot of people are not here, they don't agree on this. And specific problem with train is basically that this is specifically Germany, but also in other countries it can be bad, is that it just takes a very long time to build the infrastructure because of the planning. And transportation on train and on rail is going to ramp up. People are expecting this for personal, for people and also for goods. And they're already afraid that it's not going to keep up with the demands. So I think this is a very good point from the audience that, like, why do you fly? You should just take the train. It's just that it's not as practical or convenient as we might want it, right? Even though you just said maybe we should just create more demands and or manage the demand more and not give more options to fulfill it.
But also sustainability, as per se, it doesn't mean only environmental things. It also means economy, local economy, and welfare. So I mean, one of my colleagues, she sometimes riding a bike for 1 hour and 20 minutes together in the same road with those trucks and so on. Is it sustainable? I don't think so, because she wastes her time. She's smelling polluted cars, and it's extremely unsafe. The same with train to Gothenburg. I mean, from the perspective of environmental, it's okay, but from the personal time saving and your local economy, what could be done if you are not in the train? I think it's also not so sustainable in that way. So sustainable is content of various things which are very connected, not only environmental things.
Excellent point. Yes, Sarah, and
Just a quick addition, and also the balance between the modes. You chose a train, but I'm sure a train is still more expensive than flying. This is changing a little bit, but still going by train. I know that they have reintroduced certain night trains in Europe, which are nice, but they're immensely expensive. So people are like, no, and if I have kids, it's going to be even more expensive. So that has to shift. It has to be much, much more expensive to go buy your own car.
yeah.
I just wanted to do Sarah. And I wanted to say that in 1997, the European Commission basically made it so that planes are still, and today, planes are still a lot less expensive than trains, but because this regulation made it so that they do not have to pay VAT, they do not have to pay a lot of taxes, for fuels and services and everything else. So this was a way to incentivize European aviation. Right now, we need to do the opposite, and it's of course you're meeting very high resistance from authorities right now. But and in terms of implementing trends, you said that they're very expensive. But right now, I mean, we should probably work at the European Commission level on regulations. Who, I don't know, reduce VAT for train tickets. And again, when it comes to international trains, there are so many more obstacles than solutions, because ticketing and all of that stuff, and then national regulators have developed independence for every country. So in order to bring those under the same roof, it's very, very difficult that you have to coordinate with, like, for example, to try to make tickets more expensive, for example, for planes. So everyone will be
I saw that.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it in the beginning. First, we really definitely to include negative external costs for car transport. Each car in Germany is directly financed with about 2,000 euro per year. It's great, all of us are paying that money. And second of all, we have, for instance, for budget bikes, we have I think a policy framework from the European Commission, which says that we don't need to pay VAT for bikes. One country which did not have that, so this is Germany. Other countries, I think it was France and one, I'm not sure. But there are options, but then politicians have to make decisions, and that's something which is.
Indeed, very, very good points. And speaking of decisions, I'm just wondering, because we end up with a certain path dependency to the transport sector, right? With the path dependency, we do stuff which may have been beneficial in the past, but definitely not the case anymore. And the path dependency is infrastructural, right? You do have the infrastructure for the existing modes of transport, but also, well, mental. We just do some stuff because we've been doing this in the past as well. Just wondering if we have any insights. Where do we break this path dependency? Who is the change? You, Kristina, mentioned the excitement and for change as well. Like, how do you see this? Is there an excitement for change? And how can we instigate this? Should this be coming from the society or from the government?
One economist said to me that when you have the lowest, the worst situation, then you have less progress in the situation. So my excitement for previous 20 years goes that when you are below the zero in your country, that's when you are very excited.
Personally, we already, I mean, if I compare like the average older generation and the average younger generation, there's already a huge departure. Like when it comes to consumption of meat, when it comes to willingness to take public transport, status. Not every young person thinks it's a good status symbol to have a car, like a big car as well. So I think we're already like a lot of stuff happened. It's just that we experience it over time, so it doesn't feel like much. And also, if we measure it on our climate goals, it doesn't seem like it's enough, which is a big problem. But then on the other hand, how do you don't want to start pushing people to do something, because then there will be a reverse reaction. So it's very difficult to, and I think that's why they always incentivize you, like with the sweet bread, basically, because they don't want to push you into a negative rebound effect, basically. And there's already stuff like this. We know from, I know it's in Germany, but the stereotypical one is, of course, the US with a big car that takes 4 Cargoroos. And so I think we have to be very careful there.
Excellent point, because what we're doing here with analytics, but also what we're trying develop is, you have the laws of physics. So there's some amount of CO2 that results in certain amount of warming, right? So it's quite clear. And then we have to deal with the limits of human acceptance, societal acceptance, right? So how far do you go before you have kind of like a backlash? And certain parties and politicians in power who say, well, it's all good. It's very hot in here, and it's we're thinking, but it's climate change. Well, we'll wait with that. So how do you make this keep this balance between laws of physics and laws of social acceptance, and how can the policymakers change this and kind of like keep pushing a little bit, but without triggering this backlash as well? Not quite sure I have the answer, but and the insights are very, very welcome. Yeah,
I do think, like I said, the biggest part has to come from the policymakers to say we support this, we support sustainable mobility. In Germany, we do not have that, unfortunately. It's the opposite. They do support the car industry heavily, and it's such a huge fight. And the examples we looked at were really well. Like I said, you have policymakers that decided to go into a direction, and then you do have a backlash. And they were cities. I know the city of Ghent is my favorite example, because the vice mayor had people threatening him every day, but still he did it. They have a car-free city center now, and it works because the majority of people that you have in the city that you don't hear support you, and they wanted it, and it worked great. Still, you have a small minority that is always loud, and you always hear that. But I think to think about that it's just the minority, And then also the way you promote your policies is important. So the examples we looked at that were good, they talked about livable cities, how to include everyone, not guard against bikes or pedestrians or public transport. It's a nice livable city for everyone. Everyone wants space. Someone that drives a car also is a pedestrian at times, or also rides a bicycle. So I think that plays a big part in motivating the citizens in the city to change their modes.
The recent example from Poland, I think Warsaw for low emission zone seminar, not probably for Poland, and we had very different examples on the same low emission zone process, one from Krakow, another from Warsaw. And in Krakow, they finally got this huge support from NGOs, if you translated me very well. And with this support, Krakow was implementing quite smoothly those decisions, while Warsaw was really didn't have it. Although they had also public consultations, like in informal procedures and so on, but they didn't have this support that well. And I think it really affects how they will be successful in implementing the further stages. So this involvement of public consultation, and also in this example, on SUMP, I was looking at seniors, kids, disabled people, drivers, bus drivers, and so on and so on. And when the plan was over, and I quit municipality enterprise because I cannot work in public sector anymore, they replied to me, Kristina, have you seen, we are not doing like it's set and sustainable urban mobility plan. People are owning this document because we were involved very directly. So that's what you said. It's really, really important with public consultation, public involvement, making people to own the city, to own the documents which are about the city. That's very important. But again, it happens only in local projects. In national policy, means something else.
Fascinating and very interesting. And answers my question, is the government of society? It's actually both, right? Thank you very much. That's been fascinating discussion, and we'll have much more of it after the break, after the stations. Thank you very much. Thank you.